Welcome, everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, wherever you may be joining us from. My name is Jennifer O'Donoghue, and I'm a Senior Fellow and Deputy Director of the Center for Universal Education at Brookings. Thank you so much for joining us, and welcome to today's webinar, Voices for the Future, Empowering Adolescents and Youth Through Climate Education and Action Across Eastern and Southern Africa. Around the world, today's children are disproportionately affected by climate change. According to recent data from UNICEF, 1 billion children, that's nearly half of the world's 2.2 billion children, face extremely high risks to their ability to survive and thrive due to climate change impacts like water scarcity, extreme heat, disease, and pollution. For many of these children, the impacts of climate change intersect with poverty, conflict, and geographic, social, and political isolation. We saw this firsthand in our work with the Learning and Action Alliance for Girls Agency in countries as diverse as Bangladesh, Kenya, Vietnam, Uganda, and Zimbabwe, where we quickly learned that climate crisis impacts, along with poverty, insecurity, and discriminatory gender norms, were among the principal systemic barriers that girls identified to exercising agency in their own lives, in their educational trajectories, and in their communities. In these communities, as in countries around the world, the environmental pressures caused by climate change strain infrastructure and resources and deepen existing social inequities. Children living in climate change-affected regions navigate increased household chores, restrained mobility, increased poverty, physical and mental health challenges, increased violence, and disrupted education systems. The rise in climate-resilient education programming that is taking root across the globe offers promise, but it is vital that we include young people at the center of our efforts to build sustainable solutions with and for children and youth. For nearly a decade, the Center for Universal Education, CUE, has been a thought leader on issues of climate education. CUE has leveraged its convening power to launch global frameworks and reports, as well as to analyze the impacts of specific policies. Historically, and in large part inspired by my colleague Ellen Chigwanda, we have done this with a particular focus on the intersections of education, gender, and climate change, considering the populations often most impacted. Building off this previous work, in 2024, CUE launched a partnership with CARE Zimbabwe to work together to advance research on the state of education and climate change, specifically working in 5 countries across Eastern and Southern Africa. We bring to this work a shared commitment to increase attention, research, and action in the new field of education and climate change. In today's panel, we will hear from experts from the region who have been engaging with CUE and CARE Zimbabwe for the past year in collaborative research aimed at contributing toward climate-resilient education systems. This work, deeply grounded in the Eastern and Southern Africa region, aims not only to transform education with and for young people in the region, but also to inform regional and global discussions, building from the ground up. Throughout today's conversation, we invite you to submit questions to our email at events@brookings.edu or on Blue Sky or X using the hashtag #VisionForFuture, using the number 4, Vision4Future. So without further ado, I am delighted to introduce today's moderator, Dr. Ellen Chigwanda. Ellen is the Senior Technical Advisor for CARE Zimbabwe's Education and Climate Change work and currently leads the research partnership on education and climate change with the Center for Universal Education at Brookings. As a 2016 Echidna Global Scholar at Brookings, she explored the links between girls' education and climate change and later helped develop the Building Climate Resilient Schools pilot project. Ellen has published blogs, policy briefs, academic journals, and other pieces and contributed to CARE's Education and Climate Change Brief and the Toolkit for Youth on Adaptation and Leadership. A 2019 Obama Africa Leader, she is also the founder of Gen V Trust and has recently completed her PhD on climate change and girls' education in rural Zimbabwe at the Women's University in Africa, Zimbabwe. Thank you again for joining us, and Ellen, over to you.
Thank you so much, Jen, and thank you for helping us to frame our conversation today. I'm very excited to be part of this webinar and to introduce our panelists for today. And I'll start off with Loveness Chimuka. Dr. Loveness Chimuka is the Monitoring, Evaluation, and Research Lead at Education Development Trust in Zimbabwe. Welcome, Loveness. Secondly, I'll introduce Linis Sanga, who is the program manager at the Creative Center for Community Mobilization in Malawi. Thank you so much for joining us. And last but certainly not least, I'm going to introduce Bridget Ringdahl, who is the Sustainable Schools Program Manager at One Planet South Africa. Welcome, Bridget, and thanks for joining us. As Jen has already mentioned, CARE Zimbabwe has been leading a collaborative research partnership with 7 organizations, conducting research on some of the most innovative pedagogies for climate education amongst adolescents and youths in Zimbabwe, Malawi, South Africa, Rwanda, and Kenya. And those 7 organizations include Education Development Trust, that is in Zimbabwe, One Planet, South Africa, Creative Center for Community Mobilization in Malawi, Asante Africa Foundation in Kenya. We have Right to Play in Rwanda, Teach for Zimbabwe here in Zimbabwe, and then finally the Forum for Africa Women Educationalists in Zimbabwe. So those are the 7 exciting organizations that we've been collaborating with support from the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution. So today we will be learning more about the intersection between education and climate change based on the collaborative research that we've been doing together. So I'm going to start off with a question for all of our panelists who will answer in turn. Based on the research, how is climate change affecting education for adolescents and youth in the study area in your country? So I'm going to start with you, Linis, perhaps, to just share a little bit about how climate change is affecting education for adolescents and youths in the study area in Malawi.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Ellen. Yeah, so climate change is really affecting the adolescent youth in Malawi, particularly in terms of access to education and even skills acquisition. And again, it is magnifying inequalities in access and quality. So we see learners, particularly in the southern region and in the district where we conducted the research in Mulanje, having their classes suspended due to heavy rains. And as I'm talking right now, we started receiving the rains 3 weeks ago. So it means they have missed almost 3 weeks of lessons, whilst other learners in other parts of this country, they are learning quite well. So that is one of the biggest things that is happening. And again, with poor infrastructure, maybe bridges that are washed away, it becomes very difficult for these learners to travel to school. So for their safety, the school administration, the PTA, they just decide to say, leave these learners to stay home, or whether they've just arrived at school, they would suspend the classes just 1 hour into the timetable for them to be safe. Again, we are also seeing that climate is affecting the health. Jennifer talked about the heat wave related diseases. This has not even spared Malawi. Apart from that, we are also seeing the youth that are suffering of hunger due to food insecurity. And all these, they lead to low concentration in the classroom. And you can't believe, you can agree with me that low concentration in the classroom leads to low performance. And at the end of the day, there'll be low acquisition of skills. So this is a huge thing that is there among us. Thank you, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Linis. It's very interesting to see some of the challenges associated with climate change when we look at it from an education lens. But maybe let's skip over to South Africa and hear from Bridget what the situation there is. Bridget, maybe would you like to share a little bit about how climate change is affecting education in South Africa, and more specifically the study area that we focused on for this research? Sorry, Bridget, please unmute.
So, sorry, there we go. Generally speaking, in South Africa, we are seeing more of what we've already heard from Malawi, where learners are forced to miss school on occasion during flood events, but not only with flooding events, but also drought areas. So sometimes water is no longer available. Rainwater harvesting has dried up. There's no access to borehole water. Boreholes have run dry. And so this is starting to limit schools attendance in certain instances. With regard to our study area, we haven't seen that kind of impact at this stage. But in terms of the actual question about how is climate change affecting education, I'd like to bring up the point that despite us seeing climate change impacts all over the country and certainly in the SADC region generally, the irony is that climate change education is not prioritized. So that is affecting education for our adolescents. The fact that it isn't a feature in the education system. And that certainly is what we've seen from the research coming out in our area in South Africa, is that we know that it's not a focus, and it's very evident from the responses of those that we spoke to.
Thank you so much, Bridget. And certainly we need climate education to be prioritized so that education systems are strengthened and, well positioned to respond to the challenges associated with, climate impacts. We're going to come back now to Zimbabwe and talk to Loveness. Loveness, please do share what you are seeing, particularly in Mutoko district, in the study area that we selected for this research. How is climate change affecting education?
Thanks, Ellen. So I think we share the same findings with Malawi to a greater extent. Adolescents and youth pointed to the issue of low concentration in class due to heat waves. So we realized that climate change in Mutoko has led to an increase in the frequency and intensity of heat waves in the district. So these extreme conditions, as you are all aware, they affect, dehydration, fatigue, headaches, which really leads to low concentration in the classroom. And this has knock-on effect on the academic performance of learners in the classroom, as well as, exam results, widening the educational inequalities. Then the other thing as well, which the adolescents pointed out as a key finding, is the shortage of water due to rainfall invariabilities in Mutoko. So you'd find out that the rainfall invariabilities caused by the climate change disrupts water availability. And for subjects like agriculture, which is a key learning area in Zimbabwe, you would find out that it would be then difficult for learners to really, do practical demonstrations around tree planting, irrigation, soil conservation, which are all climate change mitigation strategies. Then the other finding also worth mentioning is that climate change has also been related to displacements due to floods as well. I think Lenice also highlighted that this has been affecting attendance, dropouts, particularly for the girls, which will be moved to temporary shelters and then exposed to, other vulnerabilities around discrimination, being prone to abuse. But I think what I need to also point it out is that as a country, our current curriculum integrated climate change across all the learning areas in the classroom. Our inspections that we revamped with the ministry is ensuring that the teachers, through their teaching and learning, they are also assessing climate change within the classroom to ensure that we have adolescents and learners who are really having problem-solving skills and critical skills to deal with climate change issues and other mitigation strategies. I may stop here for now and back to you, Ellen. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much. It's quite interesting to see some of the similarities across the three countries in terms of the impacts on climate change, in terms of, lack of concentration, school closures, destruction of school infrastructure, and how that also impacts on, key education indicators. So I wanted to now move. I know the research was also focusing on trying to understand how adolescents and youths are actually accessing climate information, climate, education, how they are, getting, knowledgeable about issues related to climate change and climate education. So I'm going to turn over to you, Linis, to find out, maybe based on the research findings, or rather Loveness, based on the research findings, what are the current as well as preferred sources of climate information and education for adolescents and youths in Mutoko district, based on the findings?
Well, yeah, thanks, Ellen. So based on the findings, the current sources of information, climate change information, is the schools mainly. Over 77% of the participants indicated that it's the schools that really ensure that they have access to climate change information. But they also highlighted issues of the media as well. That was key and topical. The community, they are also playing a vital role in ensuring that the youth and adolescents have access to climate education. But in terms of, friends and home as well, that was also highlighted. But in terms of the most preferred source, they indicated that the schools. So yeah, the educational initiatives, the schools, they are really important and they play a critical role in ensuring that the climate
I know Loveness mentioned earlier that it was raining heavily where she is, so she might be having some connectivity challenges, and we'll come back to her as soon as she gets back online. Maybe we can move on to Bridget, and maybe before we do, it was just interesting to hear from Loveness talking about the school being not only the current source of information on climate education and information, but also that, the school is the preferred source for climate education, which means that perhaps as a sector, we need to think a little bit more about how we can support schools to continue to provide climate education and to continue to be that source of information for climate education and action for adolescents and youths, in addition to some of the other sources that have already been highlighted by Loveness. I'm gonna come to you, Bridget, in South Africa, and for you maybe to share some reflections based on the findings in terms of, what are some of the barriers? So we've heard about the current and preferred sources of climate information and education, but what are you seeing from the evidence from this research in terms of the barriers to acquiring climate information and education for adolescents and youths in the study area in South Africa?
Thanks. Certainly, first and foremost, the curriculum. There are scatterings and small referrals to climate change in our curriculum across the different subjects. But for one, it's just mentions, small mentions. There's little connection between explaining what it is. You will find it very compartmentalized. There might be a section on learning about electricity production and how that's done, but there is no mention of how this relates to climate change. So the connections are not there, number one. Number two, teacher training, it shows clearly teachers themselves do not understand what climate change is. From the very, very basics, from the science explaining what climate change is, you'll find that most teachers in resourced and under-resourced schools cannot explain it. From the simple thing of explaining how it works from a scientific point of view, just what the greenhouse effect is, so the science, the causes, impacts, and solutions. Teachers have not been versed in this. So teacher training, it needs to start there. So therefore, for teachers to try and explain this to learners, it's a massive challenge. They'll rather just skip over it. Then where there is a bit of understanding, there is confusion between, you'll find very often is that teachers and learners alike will confuse what climate change is with the ozone layer and the ozone, the problems with the ozone depletion, which are two separate issues. Those are constantly confused. I'm not sure where that's been sourced, whether that's been in poor resource materials, for example, the textbooks, but this is something we constantly find whenever we're working in schools, not just in this research, it always comes up. And then simple things. How many people can really explain what the difference is between weather and climate, okay? So just those basics are not even there. And then the fact that, you know, climate change as a point of concern in our, you know, at a country level, it isn't, we don't see it being reported. I mean, we see reports in the newspaper about certain issues, and maybe there's a mention that it's climate change linked, but it's not something that's seen as urgent. Okay, and because of that, learners are missing out of learning about it and understanding it, and as such, they're not learning how they can adapt to a rapidly changing planet. So those are really the big barriers that we are seeing. And we've known these barriers for like 20 years, and it needs to happen at a policy level, absolutely. And yes, there have been changes in the curriculum over the years to try and include these kinds of things, but we're not really seeing it translate at a ground level, okay? Other barriers, there's also some misinformation and cultural beliefs that are causing, you know, or interfering with true facts and science. So there's a multitude of barriers to climate change learning and actually enabling learners to understand it and then grapple with how to adapt to a rapidly changing planet. And the fact is, even if South Africa is not as advanced as, say, Malawi and Zimbabwe and ensuring climate change is in the curriculum, we are seeing the impacts of climate change, and that is the irony. So yeah, it's a massive problem.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much, Bridget. And I think what the research is telling us, and you know what other parts of the sector are also saying, is that there's a mismatch between what the preferred learning or sources of climate education are, and clearly it's the school, and the capacity of the school to meet that appetite on the part of adolescents and youths, or the appetite on the part of the learners to get climate education, information, and skills development, and thus creating a gap that we can that we should be thinking about as a sector, and finding ways of ensuring that different stakeholders are coming together to support the schools to become a platform for building the capacity of young people to be a non-negotiable part of climate response in any community or any country. Thanks, Bridget, for that. But despite these gaps, we know that based on the research, there are some innovative approaches or pedagogies that are being adopted or explored in the across the 5 countries. And so I'm going to come to you, Lenice, to share perhaps 2 or so examples of innovative approaches that are being used in Malawi in order to ensure that adolescents and youths are able to learn about climate change, and not only learn but also apply that learning to everyday life.
Yeah, thank you so much, Ellen. Yeah, so indeed, beyond the classroom, the learners, the youth, they've talked about utilizing other spaces. And these spaces are the existing clubs. So we have clubs, out of school clubs or after school clubs, where young people, they gather, and this creates a space or a platform for ongoing practice and even peer support. So this was reported highly among them, even during the research. And as CRECOM, we were implementing a program with Room to Read, a video-based life skills program where climate change is one of the themes that is highly advocated in that program. So we have seen that from the research, young people, they talked about the need for more practice, the need for more performance, and the need for more local stewardship. And this can only happen when there are spaces beyond the set timetables that are there in the classrooms. So that was one of the innovations that they talked about, that beyond discussing, beyond learning in front of a teacher, they should also practice, whether it's planting trees, whether it's discussing about the vegetation they can keep around their school for them to conserve the environment. That would be very, very key. And secondly, they also talked about the need to raise awareness, having more awareness campaigns. These would be through roadshows, radio messages, where we use the national radio stations or even the community radio stations that are available in their areas. And we believe, or they believe, that these messages will broaden the reach, not only young people that are within their catchment area, but even those that are beyond. You know, issues of climate change, a practice happening in village X affects village Y. So it means even though village X, you know, would be good in terms of conserving their environment, but if there are surrounding areas that are not doing well, they will also suffer the consequences. So the need to raise awareness is there for us to normalize the pro-environment behavior that will help everyone, including our adolescent young people that are in education right now.
Thank you so much, Lenise, for sharing. And I know, having looked at some of the data from Malawi, there's a lot of interesting, findings around, innovative approaches and ways in which, schools are really trying to bridge that gap between, what the learners know and what they can do, and how they can also see themselves as part of this, trying to address and to combat the impacts of climate change, particularly on education and skills development for young people. But staying in Malawi, Lenise, and based on the findings, I wanted to find out from you what the data is saying about, which stakeholders could be involved in coordinating efforts around climate education for adolescents and youth, and what would be the roles of these stakeholders?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so combating the effects of climate change requires a multi-sectoral approach. And this even resonated with the findings that we got from the youth. So they talked about the NGOs, non-governmental organizations. They talked about the local leaders. They talked about the government departments and ministries. They also talked about the public departments or other ministries, like the Ministry of Information, radio stations that are there in terms of to support the dissemination of messages. And for the local leaders, the young people, they say that they have a role in terms of even providing space where the community and even the young people can plant the trees. Yeah, the NGOs, most of them, they come with advocacy. They do sensitizations in the communities. They mobilize the communities to action. Yeah, so they said that a multi-sectoral approach where everyone has a stake to take will lead us not just to rhetoric actions, but even the vivid or practical activities that will happen, be it planting trees or doing those door-to-door campaigns to ask everyone to take part in conserving the environment around them.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Lenise, for sharing those examples. So I'm going to come back to all the panelists and to hear more about, some of the recommendations based on the findings. What are some of the recommendations that will be included in the toolkit and report that is emanating from this research on how adolescents can be supported to learn more about climate change so that they can be part of climate adaptation and action? Maybe I'll start with you, Loveness. Are you back online?
Yes, I hope you can hear me back.
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay, thank you so much. So the first recommendation, based on the findings, I think it's also what Bridget highlighted, that there's need for continuous professional development of the teachers on climate change education so that they can deliver or are able to deliver education around climate change in the classroom, be it in their teaching, given that the schools were highlighted as the most preferred sources of climate change information. So we want the learners to be equipped and spot on the skills and knowledge around climate change adaptation and sustainability practices. Then the other recommendation for us as a country, I think I indicated that we are a bit advanced in the fact that we've got climate change mainstreamed already across all the learning areas in the country, but there's need to strengthen the integration of that climate change in all the schools to ensure that if the inspectors, heads are inspecting or assessing teaching and learning in the classroom, they need also to assess issues around climate change. Then finally, strengthening the community school linkages could also help, because beyond the school, these youth and adolescents, they get to their homes. So that we need hubs for creating awareness in the communities so that they are platforms for climate knowledge sharing. So these community sensitization events, be it plays, exhibitions, maybe we are talking with the of the young people. So we need also exciting platforms that will really ensure that they sit and enjoy the teachings around climate change education. Back to you, Ellen.
Thank you, Loveness, for those recommendations. Maybe I'll go over to Bridget in South Africa. What could be some of the key recommendations on how adolescents and youths can be supported, not only to learn more about climate change, but to be, part of, the climate conversations and actions in their localities and in their countries?
Absolutely. So I think probably key here, and is what we found in our work, is that action-based experiential learning is a vital component. It's all very well understanding what climate change is in the talk and talk manner, but if children aren't learning by doing and making the connections that if they are growing their own food, if they are mulching, if they are increasing biodiversity at their school, if they are doing water-saving practices and so on, all of these things, action projects, you can actually bring into the classroom to learn about, and there are actually ways to help and adapt to climate change and to minimize impacts. So I think the thing is that a lot of the time, children don't realize they actually are learning about climate change adaptation, but they're not understanding that it is part of the climate change story. So helping them with experiential learning, that is absolutely vital. And in our work through sustainable schools and programs like the Eco Schools program, that is where children actually grasp concepts and actually can take those skills, can learn how to build their own solar oven using recycled materials and use it to cook food at home at 100 degrees with minimal resources. Okay, and that is helping them to adapt to impacts of climate change, for example, through electricity production and so on. So those kinds of things. And then, as I've touched on, joining programs, there are, we know that at a policy level, we need our governments to be taking climate change seriously and integrating it into subjects and subject matter and all of that. So even if that is happening, but to strengthen that and to assist that while that is still happening, is to join programs like the International Eco Schools program, which is operating in, I think 78 countries now. So joining those kind of frameworks, it helps schools to organize the actions that they are doing and to help teachers to get the knowledge or the information that they might be lacking in a quick, easy way. They don't have to wait for the government to run a workshop on, integrating climate change or whatever. They can actually join today and they can access resources that are already out there that can assist them to understand better and to integrate climate change learning in the classroom more. And those programs are also so fantastic because they we find that they enable schools to feel part of something bigger than themselves. There are other schools in their country that might be part of those programs. And then, of course, there are other countries in the world where there are schools just like them who are trying to do their bit around climate change learning and addressing the impacts thereof. So I think, yeah, because, you know, organizing these things outside of schools is actually really difficult. So if you can try and bring a framework that helps teachers to do what they should be doing in the classroom, covering the curriculum, but giving it a climate change focus with an action component, then I think the learning happens more easily and you're fulfilling a number of things, the teachers covering the content, but then also enabling learners to get to grips with this massive pressing issue that we're facing, and then also to learn practical things that they can do at home. And these aren't big, massive projects. They're simple things, water saving projects with tippy tap systems, or, you know, learning how to grow food, but in an integrated manner using permaculture practices instead of just monoculture, okay? These are all adaptation projects that enable learners to do these things in a rapidly changing climate, because we're not going to be able to stop temperatures going up. So what can we do to minimize the impact and to adapt our lives to changing environments? So, I mean, I think those are the real key things: practical, experiential learning. Mm-hmm. And then meaningful action, taking action. It's all very well being aware, but what can we do? What can we do? And that might be a simple recycling project, like collecting, you know, there's no recycling in South Africa, hardly at all. So what can we do with all this terrible plastic? That is a problem. One of the symptoms of climate change, fossil fuel industry, all of that, producing these plastics, the plastics are in the sea, in the rivers, choking our oceans and so on. What can we do? And no one's recycling it. Well, we can at least make eco bricks, ramming 2-liter Coke bottles with those plastics. It takes one black bag of plastic to fill one 2-liter Coke bottle. What can you do with that? Then you can actually make benches, you know, in under the trees in the schools. And at least it's not the ultimate solution, but it's helping to contain the problem temporarily at least. So these are the things I'm talking about: simple, low key projects that any school can implement, whether resourced or not. So yeah, those kind of programs like sustainable schools, eco schools, I urge you know, anyone listening who runs a school to sign up to those, you know, because you can start today. You don't have to wait for curriculum to change or subject content to change. You can start today.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Bridget. That sounds really interesting. I found the concept of eco bricks quite fascinating, and I'd love to learn more about how that's going. And I know young people want to learn, using play-based methodologies that that excite them and that gives them opportunity to use art and craft, but at the same time learning about climate change and seeing how they can actually apply it in their day-to-day lives, and how they can also take some of that learning home, so that it becomes a whole ecosystem of climate adaptation, mitigation and action, but starting with adolescents and youths at the center. Thanks, Bridget. I'm going to go over to Malawi and ask Linis to share a few recommendations that you think align well with the research findings that can be taken up as a result of this research that we've all done together.
Yeah, thank you so much. So one of the recommendations that came out of the research is the need to utilize and deploy micro-curriculum ideas. So these are things like short dramas, maybe dramas they can perform in the community, and even radio dramas. And to us as CRECOM, we feel that this is really resonating with our youth empowerment strategy, where we take them at the center of our programming. So when they talked about their involvement in the short dramas on climate change, we feel that they need to be involved even in finding out the root causes of the problem, in designing how this drama should look like, and even in co-creating the solutions to the challenges that they have unearthed through their drama performance. So these would be performed at community level, and at the same time, they talked about having young people that have the skill to capture that content, and that content should be transmitted onto the radio for us to have radio-based drama that depicts the issues that are happening in these communities. Apart from that, they also talked about the need for us to have IEC materials, educational materials like posters, where positive behaviors on how the environment would be conserved, and on the role that the young people, the adolescent girls and boys, should take for them to actively participate in changing the effects of climate change in their locality. And apart from that, they also talked about the need for us to strengthen the youth voice through the youth forums. So these are out-of-school spaces for young people where they discuss topical issues affecting them. So this would also be a better platform for them to engage in an honest dialogue on how they're contributing to climate change, and even those around them are contributing to climate change. And together, they come up with solutions. So there would be pioneers in planting trees, pioneers in picking trees, or even in picking plastic that is just loitering around and affecting our oceans and rivers and lakes. Yeah, so that's something else that the youth talked about. And again, we are also saying that we need to produce a toolkit. And in this toolkit, would want to see those positive behaviors being depicted. And these, the toolkit will be used by the young people to generate discussions, or to ignite discussion among fellow young people, and even discussions with local leaders, discussions with other cultural gatekeepers that are there, on how best collectively as a community we can come up with better solutions for us to mitigate the effects of climate change. And it should not just end on producing and distributing these kits, but rather we also have to take an active role in making sure that these young people are equipped in terms of how they can better facilitate a discussion at community level, and even at school level, even at an after class club. How best can they facilitate a discussion for young people to be inspired, motivated, and mobilized to act, so that we should see more change agents and more champions out there that would help us to mitigate the effects of climate change, and even be promoters of better practices.
Thank you. Thank you so much. These are all very exciting. I like the idea of a toolkit. And in fact, as part of harnessing the evidence that came out of this research, the research product is actually going to include a toolkit that will capture some of those recommendations that came from all the stakeholders that participated, including the adolescents and the youths themselves, so that we can provide practical recommendations of how others beyond the countries and the communities where we conducted the research, some of the actions that they can think about and explore and contextualize for their own education systems as well. And so talking about going beyond the Eastern and Southern Africa, particularly the 5 countries where we conducted the research, I'd like to thank the panelists for responding to the questions that we had for the panel section of this webinar, and move us into the Q&A section. And I know that we've received some questions from our esteemed participants. So I'm just going to ask these questions and direct them to our panelists so that we can get them to contribute. So the first question is coming from Ruth Schimel. I hope I didn't, mutilate that name, from Choose Courage Publishing. And Ruth is asking, so American youth can also benefit from this work as well, on climate change education. What cross-fertilization ideas would you imagine or suggest? So American youth can benefit from this as well. That is climate change education. So what cross-fertilization would you imagine or suggest? And my understanding of that question is Ruth is basically saying, it's interesting to hear what is coming out of the 5 countries across the Eastern and Southern Africa region. And she would like to hear some ideas of how this learning that we are getting from these 5 countries can find its way to the US and to adolescents and youths in that region, so that they can also learn and be part of this movement. Of course, we know that there's probably lots going on in the US as well, but what ideas might we have in terms of providing opportunities for cross-fertilization across regions as part of the climate education amongst adolescents and youths movement. So I'm not sure if there's anyone who wants to answer that, or maybe I can just nominate one of you. I don't know, Lenice, you're the one who is on my screen at the moment. Would you have any ideas of how some of these ideas can be cross-fertilized across the African and the American regions?
Yeah, thank you so much. So I think the last point that we talked about, the toolkit, I think that would be one key tool that would go beyond our borders, and every continent or young people from those places can ably benefit from it. So this toolkit will have a comprehensive approaches and exciting strategies that young people can use to engage themselves and even engage others on issues around climate change. So I think that's the priority to me, that I would say that the toolkit can go beyond our borders and be of benefit to many young people around us.
Okay, great. I don't know, Bridget, do you want to add any thoughts to the question around cross-fertilization across regions, particularly when you look at climate education amongst adolescents and youth?
Yeah, certainly what Lenisa said, I think it's quite nice. We can share different approaches to similar problems. We go for low tech, okay, in South Africa, and I think very much the case in Zimbabwe and Malawi. And I think some of those low tech approaches are actually universal. The nice thing about that is that low tech approaches to learning in terms of action projects, that's what I mean. If we share an action project on water saving in South Africa with Malawi and Zimbabwe, it'll resonate with them very well, because we'll be using low-key technologies like tippy taps, doing simple water audits. But a country like the States, which is a resource country and has a very different context for those learners, it would be a wonderful opportunity for them to also try those low-tech solutions to, say, a water-saving project for climate change that is used in Malawi, Zimbabwe, and South Africa, for example. And in that way, adolescents can view how climate change is realized in different parts of the world, number one, and that low-tech solutions are universal. No, for example, I always say to all our schools in South Africa, no school in South Africa is too posh for tippy taps, which I'm implying that even the private schools in South Africa should be putting tippy taps up, which are just simple 2-liter bottles that a child flips and washes its hands and after the toilet or whatever, and you use 10 to 20 times less water than under a tap. So, that's not above anyone. So I love those solutions because they can be applied easily at no cost anywhere. And it also is a lovely way of countries, people in different contexts and countries learning about a solution that is universal. The other way of sharing is, as again, I'll refer to the Eco Schools network. It's probably the biggest environmental education network in the world, and essentially that's what Eco Schools all over the world are doing. They're trying to address climate change issues through looking at all the aspects of climate change related to biodiversity, water, energy, waste, etc. And when you sign up with that network, which in most cases it's a nominal amount, if at all. Most countries it's a free registration. You have access to all sorts of countries all over the world, and there's an opportunity to twin with a school. And I think that's quite a potentially valuable way. I know technology is not always possible in our schools in South Africa and in Malawi, but sometimes a plan can be made. So a similar sort of situation where a little Zoom chat can be facilitated once or twice or 3 times a year with your colleague or your twin school overseas, I think is a great way for engaging and chatting more about these issues. Yeah, so those are my 2 suggestions.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Maybe Loveness, I might turn to you. We have another question from Bruce Gatling, who's writing in from Austin, Texas, in the US. And Bruce is asking, how do you arrange such educational events outside of school hours? So we talked quite a bit about what's happening in the schools and some of the activities that can happen as part of the curriculum and the normal sort of school system. But Bruce wants to understand how, what recommendations do you have for arranging such, events that are focused on climate education outside of the school hours? Any thoughts, Loveness, on that?
Yeah, thanks, Ellen. Yes, we can keep the school as the first approach, but we can also reinforce it with other social media, micro lessons or radio segments that adolescents can access probably after class. In Zimbabwe, one of our innovative approaches around that is the creation of audio visual content on climate education, which can later be broadcasted on the platforms that the youth or adolescents really access such much. For example, WhatsApp groups. This can also help beyond the classroom. But I think I can also borrow and extend on, I think that was Bridget's point on having representatives from youth programs across the regions where they can be gathered together online, then they can share and exchange best practices around climate change education, mitigation and sustainable practices. Yeah, I think that's what I can think of for now, those 3 strategies. And back to you, Ellen.
Thank you so much, Loveness. And I have a final question just before we wrap up our webinar. And this is coming from Elizabeth Gitonga, who is from the African Early Childhood Network. And Elizabeth is asking, how can we develop policies that equip adolescents and youth with the knowledge and skills to harness the Earth's potential? That is responsible use of the Earth's resources that will result in prosperity. So Elizabeth just wants to understand, what ideas we might have in terms of developing skills that equip young people and adolescents to basically engage in responsible use of the Earth's resources in order to, to ensure prosperity. So I don't know, between Lenice and Bridget, any final ideas on recommendations on policy development?
Yeah.
Well, if I was president, I would say that every learner in every school has to have a Nature Connect experience at least 2 or 3 times a year. Okay, the reason why I love my job working in schools, trying to, encourage other kids to love the planet is because I love the planet. And why do I love the planet is because I have had lots of nature connect experiences where I've been into nature, I've been into a beautiful wilderness area, I've immersed myself in nature and I can see the beauty of it. And if you've never had that connection and you have never had that experience, how can you expect or want people to protect it if they don't know what the value of it is and to see it for what it is? It's the beautiful ecosystems that we have supporting us. So yeah, I think we have to go back to basics here. We have to have those connections with our planet. And at the moment, there is this massive disconnect. I mean, you know, I feel sorry for children growing up in cities where there's very little access to nature. And they don't know how to run around without their shoes on, and they don't know what it's like to climb a tree. So yeah, I think those are absolutely key in trying to get to the bottom of any of this and trying to, you know, salvage what's left, is to get people to care. And how to get people to care is to show them and experience the beauty of the planet.
Thank you,
So,
Bridget.
yeah, I think that's what we have to have now.
Thanks, Bridget. Linus, I know you wanted to chime in the last minute or two that we have around policy and how that policy can equip adolescents and youths to, you know, engage in responsible use of the Earth's resources for prosperity.
Yeah, so to me, I think for a long time, we have excluded young people in discussions around policy. Yeah, so even in the research that we are doing currently with the Brookings, we're looking at amplifying youth agency, yeah, in education system transformation. So in this case, I want us to really put the youth at the center. Let them be in those forums where we talk about how do they get involved in the resources that are there in our nature for them to benefit. Because in most cases we see, you know, it's not the young people that are taking the lion's share or benefiting more, but there are other people within, you know, our societies that are benefiting. So let's put the youth at the center. Let them be there in discussing how these policies should look like and how do we get more young people, even those that are excluded, those that are in the remotest parts of the country, how do they get them at the center for them to benefit from the resources that are there from Mother Planet?
Thank you so much. So much to learn, and I know we only had 1 hour, and yet, you know, we've got so much coming out of the research that we conducted together in the 5 countries. So it leaves me now to really thank, I want to start off by thanking Jen O'Donoghue, who is the Deputy Director of the Center for Universal Education at the Brookings Institution in Washington, D.C. Thank you for framing this webinar for us. And I would like to thank our esteemed panelist, Linus Langa from CRECOM, which is in Malawi, Bridget Ringdahl, who is part of the One Planet South Africa, and also Dr. Loveness Chimuka, who is part of Education Development Trust here in Zimbabwe. Thank you so much, not only for being our panelists today, but for being part of this collaborative research and sharing your expertise and experience, and also sharing some of the findings that we are getting from the research that we conducted together. Maybe just to mention that this webinar is the start of our dissemination plan or rollout of this research. So please do look out for other webinars that will be coming up. We are also in the process of co-authoring some blogs that will be associated with the webinars. So continuing to find opportunities to share these findings and our experiences of the collaborative research with different audiences, not only in the 5 countries that participated in the research, but also within the region, East and Southern Africa regions, in Africa more broadly, and then beyond that to the other continents. So please do look out for other activities that will be coming up. And of course, the publication of the actual, collaborative research product, including a toolkit that we are currently designing. So thank you. I also want to thank the crew behind the scenes for supporting the webinar, and everybody who's been watching. I know we were not able to get through all your questions, but hopefully next time we can, make more time for the questions that come in from the audience. Thank you so much for watching, and see you next time.